HOA Karen expanded her patio onto my lot, then screamed as the county demolished it. Entitled People Karen's $30,000 Mistake, The Property Line War Chapter 1, The Perfect Neighborhood. The moving truck had barely pulled away from my new house on Maple Street when I knew I had found my slice of suburban paradise. Burwood Heights was everything I had dreamed of after years of cramped apartment living. Mature oak trees lined the streets, well-maintained colonial homes sat on generous lots, and the neighborhood had that pristine quality that spoke of pride and community standards. I had spent months house hunting, and this particular property had checked every box. The realtor, an enthusiastic woman named Sharon, had walked me through every detail. The house was a charming two-story colonial with original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a spacious backyard perfect for the garden I had always wanted to plant. Most importantly, the property came with a comprehensive survey completed just 2 years prior, showing clear boundary lines that I studied meticulously before signing the papers. My backyard bordered the property of Karen Peterson, who lived in an impressive colonial behind mine. Sharon had mentioned that Karen was the HOA president and had been a fixture in the neighborhood for over a decade. "She really keeps this place running smoothly," Sharon had said with a knowing smile. "Very involved in community affairs." During my first week, I met several neighbors who all seemed genuinely welcoming. There was Bob Martinez, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down and immediately offered to help with any yard work. Margaret Chen, a pediatric nurse who lived across the street, brought over a casserole and a bottle of wine. Even the teenage paper delivery boy took the time to introduce himself and ask about my preferred delivery spot. The neighborhood had an active community message board where residents shared everything from restaurant recommendations to warnings about door-to-door salespeople. I noticed that Karen Peterson's name appeared frequently, always in some organizing capacity, coordinating holiday decorations, reminding people about HOA dues, or announcing community events. My first actual glimpse of Karen came during my second week. I was in my kitchen, unpacking the last of my dishes, when I heard the distinctive sound of a leaf blower. Through my window, I could see a woman in a pristine white tracksuit with rhinestone accents directing a landscaping crew in her backyard. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the morning hour, and she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. She caught me watching and waved enthusiastically, her smile bright and welcoming. I waved back, making a mental note to properly introduce myself soon. She seemed like the kind of neighbor who would be a valuable ally in understanding the rhythms and unwritten rules of Burwood Heights. Chapter 2, The construction begins. 2 months into my residency, I had settled into a comfortable routine. My home office was fully set up, the garden was taking shape, and I had even joined the neighborhood book club that met monthly at the community center. I felt like I was finally becoming part of the fabric of Burwood Heights. That sense of belonging was interrupted on a Tuesday morning when I was awakened by the sound of heavy machinery. From my bedroom window, I could see a small excavator in Karen's backyard, along with several workers in hard hats. My first thought was mild annoyance at the early hour. It was barely 7 a.m., but I reminded myself that home improvements were part of suburban life. Over my morning coffee, I watched the crew work with professional efficiency. They appeared to be preparing the ground for some kind of extension to Karen's existing patio. The current patio was already impressive, a raised stone platform with built-in planters and decorative lighting. It seemed like an odd choice to expand it, but people have different ideas about how to use their outdoor space. By the end of the week, the foundation work was complete, and I could see the scope of the project. This wasn't going to be a simple patio extension. It looked like Karen was creating an entire outdoor entertainment complex. Pallets of expensive-looking flagstone were delivered, along with materials for what appeared to be built-in seating and a fire feature. I have to admit, I was impressed by the ambition of the project. Karen clearly had excellent taste and wasn't cutting corners on materials. The flagstone was a beautiful gray limestone with subtle veining, the kind of premium material you'd see in upscale home and garden magazines. The workers were skilled craftsmen, laying each stone with precision and attention to detail. But as the construction progressed into the 3rd week, something began to bother me. The new stonework seemed to be extending unusually close to what I believed was the property line. At first, I dismissed my concern as new homeowner paranoia. Surely someone who had lived here for 15 years and served as HOA president would be meticulous about property boundaries. Still, the nagging feeling persisted. One evening, I retrieved my survey documents from the filing cabinet and spread them across my dining room table. The survey was comprehensive, showing not only the boundary lines but also the location of utility easements, building setback requirements, and the positions of permanent markers. Armed with a measuring tape and the survey, I spent an hour on Saturday morning checking the physical markers against the documentation. My property was marked by iron stakes at each corner, and the survey showed their exact coordinates. When I measured from the northeast corner stake toward Karen's construction site, my suspicions were confirmed. The new patio was definitely crossing onto my property. Chapter 3: The diplomatic approach. I spent the weekend debating how to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to march over immediately and demand an explanation, but I had learned from years of corporate experience that the direct approach often creates more problems than it solves. Karen was not only my neighbor but also the HOA president, which meant she had significant influence in the community. I needed to handle this delicately. I decided to approach the situation diplomatically, hoping that Karen would be as reasonable as she appeared to be. On Monday evening, I walked over to her house and rang the doorbell. She answered promptly, wearing her signature velour tracksuit, this one in a soft lavender color with rhinestone accents that caught the porch light. "Well, hello there," she said with what seemed like genuine warmth. "I was just thinking I should come over and properly welcome you to the neighborhood. I'm Karen Peterson, HOA president and your neighbor." She invited me onto her expansive front porch, which was decorated with seasonal flowers and elegant outdoor furniture. Everything about her home and presentation spoke of someone who took pride in appearances and had the means to maintain high standards. "I love what you've done with your landscaping," I said, gesturing toward her meticulously maintained front yard. "And the patio project looks impressive." Her smile became even brighter. "Thank you. I've been planning this expansion for months. It's going to be perfect for entertaining. I host the annual HOA board barbecue, you know, and the old patio was just too small for the kind of gatherings we like to have." I took a breath and carefully explained my concern about the construction. I showed her photos I had taken and referenced the survey markers, trying to keep my tone conversational and non-confrontational. "I'm sure it's just a simple mistake," I said. "Maybe the contractors misunderstood where the property line was. These things happen all the time." Karen's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. The warmth seemed to cool by several degrees as she waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, honey," she said with practiced sweetness, "I think you're confused. Those survey lines are notoriously unreliable. I've been living here for 15 years, and I know exactly where my property ends. The previous owner of your house never had any concerns about the boundary." She stood up abruptly, smoothing her tracksuit. "I have an HOA board meeting to attend in a few minutes, but don't worry about the property lines. Everything is exactly where it should be." Before I could respond, she had ushered me off the porch and closed the door behind me. The interaction had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it left me with a distinctly uneasy feeling. Chapter 4: The construction escalates. Over the next few weeks, Karen's construction project transformed from impressive to extravagant. What had started as a simple patio extension became an elaborate outdoor entertainment complex that would rival anything featured in Better Homes and Gardens. The expensive flagstone was laid in intricate patterns, creating distinct zones for dining, lounging, and conversation. Professional-grade outdoor lighting was installed, including path lights, accent lighting for the landscaping, and dramatic uplighting for the mature trees. A built-in gas fire pit became the centerpiece, surrounded by curved stone seating that could accommodate at least a dozen people. But the most troubling aspect was that all of this construction extended at least 8 feet onto my property. I documented everything with photos and videos, measuring repeatedly to confirm the encroachment. Each measurement confirmed what I already knew: a significant portion of Karen's elaborate outdoor space was being built on land that legally belonged to me. The construction workers seemed uncomfortable when I approached them with questions. They were clearly skilled professionals, but they avoided eye contact when I asked about permits and property boundaries. "The homeowner handles all of that," one of them mumbled before quickly returning to his work. I noticed they worked unusually long hours, often starting at dawn and working until dusk. It was as if they were trying to complete the project as quickly as possible to avoid scrutiny. The constant noise of construction equipment, delivery trucks, and workers became a daily annoyance that I endured while trying to figure out my next move. During the 4th week of construction, I caught one of the workers during his lunch break and tried to engage him in casual conversation. "Beautiful work you're doing," I said. "Must be nice to work on such a high-end project." He looked around nervously before responding. "Yeah, it's a good job. The lady knows what she wants and isn't afraid to pay for quality." I imagine permits for something this elaborate must be pretty complicated, I said, trying to sound casual. His expression became guarded. You'd have to ask the homeowner about that. We just do what we're told. Chapter 5, the second attempt. I tried one more time to resolve the situation neighbor to neighbor. On a Thursday afternoon, I caught Karen getting her mail and approached her with printed photos clearly showing the encroachment. Karen, I hate to bother you again, but I've done some more careful measuring, and I'm really concerned about the property line issue. She looked at the photos briefly, her expression shifting from mild annoyance to barely concealed contempt. When she handed them back, her smile was condescending. Sweetheart, you're new to this neighborhood, and I think you don't understand how things work here. I've been president of the HOA for 8 years, and I think I know a thing or two about property maintenance and improvements. She paused, looking pointedly at my front yard, which admittedly needed some attention. Maybe you should focus on getting your own landscaping up to neighborhood standards before you start worrying about mine. The HOA does have standards, you know. The message was clear and unmistakable. Not only did she have no intention of acknowledging the property encroachment, but she was also subtly threatening to use her position as HOA president to make my life difficult. As she walked back to her house, she called over her shoulder, "You should really consider joining the HOA board. We could use someone with your attention to detail." Chapter 6, the HOA response. Reluctantly, I decided to contact the HOA board directly. I spent an evening crafting a carefully worded email that outlined the situation objectively, included all my documentation, and requested the board's guidance on resolving the property boundary dispute. The response came 2 days later from Gerald Morrison, the vice president of the HOA board. His email was polite but clearly designed to distance the board from any involvement in the situation. "Dear neighbor," it began, "thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. However, boundary disputes between individual property owners are considered civil matters that fall outside the HOA's jurisdiction. We encourage you to work directly with your neighbor to resolve any concerns, or to seek legal counsel if necessary." What bothered me most was that Gerald had carbon copied Karen on his response, effectively alerting her to my attempt to involve the board. Within hours, I received a text message from Karen that was surprisingly direct. "I see you're trying to cause trouble with the board. Not a good way to start your relationship with the neighborhood. Let's keep this between us." It was becoming clear that Karen's position as HOA president gave her significant influence over the board members. They were either unwilling or unable to take any action that might put them in conflict with her. Chapter 7, Professional Intervention. Left with no other choice, I hired a licensed surveyor to conduct an official property survey. I researched carefully and selected David Hong, a surveyor with excellent reviews and experience in residential property disputes. David arrived on a Tuesday morning with high-tech equipment and a methodical approach. He spent hours measuring, documenting, and taking photographs. He located the original iron stakes that marked my property corners and used GPS equipment to confirm their coordinates against the county records. The process took most of the day, and I noticed Karen watching from her kitchen window. At one point, she came outside and tried to engage David in conversation, but he politely explained that he needed to focus on his work. When David presented his final report 3 days later, it confirmed what I already knew in precise, legal language. Karen's new patio, fire pit, and landscaping extended 8.3 feet onto my property at the widest point. The encroachment covered approximately 300 square feet of my lot, with an estimated value of $15,000 based on local property values. "This is one of the clearest cases of property encroachment I've seen," David told me. "The evidence is overwhelming and well documented. You have a strong case if you decide to take legal action." Armed with this official documentation, I contacted Sarah Mitchell, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed the surveyor's report and all my documentation before offering her assessment. "You have an excellent case," she said. "The encroachment is significant, well documented, and clearly intentional. I recommend we start with a formal cease and desist letter demanding removal of all structures from your property within 30 days. Chapter 8, the cease and desist. Sarah drafted a formal cease and desist letter that was both professional and unmistakably serious. The letter detailed the encroachment, cited relevant property laws, and demanded the removal of all structures from my property within 30 days. It also warned of potential legal action if Karen failed to comply. I decided to hand-deliver the letter to ensure there could be no claims that Karen hadn't received it. On a Saturday morning, I walked over to her house and rang the doorbell, making sure to record the interaction on my phone for legal purposes. Karen answered the door in a bright pink tracksuit, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her smile faltered when she saw the official-looking envelope in my hand. "What's this?" she asked, her voice already taking on a defensive tone. "It's a formal notice about the property boundary issue," I said calmly. "I think you should read it carefully." She tore open the envelope and began reading. I watched her face change from confusion to anger to rage as she processed the contents. By the time she reached the demand for removal of structures, her face was red with fury. "This is harassment," she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Pure harassment. 3 neighbors who were out walking their dogs had stopped to watch the commotion. Karen seemed to realize she had an audience and played to it dramatically. "This person is trying to steal my property," she announced to the gathered neighbors. "I've been living here for 15 years, and now this troublemaker wants to destroy my beautiful patio." She tore the letter into pieces and threw them at my feet. The dramatic gesture seemed to energize her further. "My nephew is a lawyer, and he's going to sue you for defamation and emotional distress. You picked the wrong person to mess with." She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard that her seasonal autumn wreath fell off and scattered decorative leaves across the porch. Chapter 9, The Community Response. Within hours of the cease and desist confrontation, a post appeared on the neighborhood message board that clearly came from Karen. The post was titled "Warning, Troublesome New Resident," and painted me as a jealous neighbor who was harassing a long-standing community member. "I want to warn everyone about the new resident who has been making false accusations about property boundaries," the post read. "This person is clearly jealous of the improvements I've made to my property and is trying to cause trouble for no reason. I've been a dedicated member of this community for 15 years, serving as your HOA president and organizing countless events. I hope you'll all be aware of this person's disruptive behavior." The post received several immediate responses from residents who were clearly Karen's allies. They expressed shock and support for Karen, suggesting that I was the real problem in the neighborhood. But the response wasn't entirely one-sided. I began receiving private messages from other neighbors sharing their own experiences with Karen's behavior. Margaret Chen, the pediatric nurse who had welcomed me with a casserole, sent a particularly revealing message. "Karen has been pushing boundaries for years," she wrote. "She once tried to claim part of the community garden space for her own private use, and she's constantly finding violations in other people's yards while ignoring her own. You're not her first victim, just the first person brave enough to fight back." Bob Martinez, the retired teacher, called me directly. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her," he said. "She's been getting away with this behavior for too long because people are afraid of retaliation. Good for you for not backing down." Chapter 10, Legal Escalation. Sarah Mitchell reviewed the community message board posts and actually smiled when she saw Karen's public statements. "This is actually helpful for our case," she explained. "Karen's public admission that she received your cease and desist letter, combined with her accusations of harassment, will only strengthen our position. She's essentially admitting that she's aware of the legal notice and is choosing to ignore it." Sarah advised me to document everything and avoid any direct contact with Karen. The next step was filing a formal complaint with the county zoning office and initiating legal proceedings for trespassing and property encroachment. The paperwork was comprehensive and detailed. In addition to the surveyor's report and photographs, Sarah included documentation of all my attempts to resolve the matter amicably, Karen's refusal to acknowledge the problem, and her public statements about the dispute. "We're also going to request that the county inspect the construction for permit violations," Sarah explained. "Most major construction projects require permits, and I doubt Karen obtained proper authorization for work that extends onto your property." The complaint was filed on a Friday, and I received confirmation that a county inspector would visit the property within the next week. I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety, relief that the legal process was finally moving forward, and anxiety about the inevitable confrontation that would follow. Chapter 11, The County Inspector Arrives. The county inspector arrived on a Tuesday morning in an official vehicle marked with the county seal. From my kitchen window, I watched him examine the property lines, reviewing the survey documents and taking extensive photographs. Inspector James Rodriguez was a methodical professional who clearly knew his job. He spent over an hour measuring distances, checking the positions of the iron stakes, and documenting the extent of the encroachment. He also examined the construction quality and took notes about the materials used. Karen must have seen his official vehicle because she came running out in her bathrobe and slippers, her hair still in curlers, the first time I had ever seen her looking less than perfectly put together. "Good morning, officer," she said with forced cheer. "I'm Karen Peterson, the HOA president. Is there something I can help you with?" "I'm Inspector Rodriguez from the county zoning office," he replied professionally. "I'm here to investigate a complaint about unpermitted construction and property encroachment." Karen immediately switched to charm mode, offering coffee and fresh-baked muffins. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. I've been living here for 15 years, and I know exactly where my property boundaries are." When the charm offensive didn't work, Karen changed tactics. "I have permits for everything," she claimed. "This is all completely legal and authorized." Inspector Rodriguez calmly asked to see the permits. Karen stammered about having them somewhere inside but never produced any documentation. She kept promising to bring them out in just a minute while continuing to distract him with conversation. The inspector spent another hour measuring and documenting before reaching his conclusions. He handed Karen several official violation notices, each one detailing a specific violation and the associated penalties. Chapter 12, The violations. The violations were extensive and serious: illegal construction without permits, major construction projects requiring permits for safety and code compliance, building in violation of setback requirements, construction too close to property lines, violating county building codes, encroachment onto neighboring property, building structures on land that didn't belong to her, failure to obtain proper inspections, no official inspections of electrical, plumbing, or structural work. Each violation carried potential fines ranging from $500 to $2,000, but the real blow came when Inspector Rodriguez posted an orange demolition notice on Karen's fence. "You have 14 days to remove all structures from the neighboring property voluntarily," he explained. "If you fail to comply, the county will hire contractors to do the work and bill you for the cost." Karen's scream of rage could be heard 3 houses away. "This is impossible. I've spent $30,000 on this patio. You can't just destroy it." "Ma'am, you chose to build on property that doesn't belong to you," the inspector replied calmly. "The county has no choice but to enforce property rights." Karen began making frantic phone calls, pacing back and forth in her backyard while gesticulating wildly. I could hear fragments of her conversations through the window: demands to speak to supervisors, threats of lawsuits, and appeals to various contacts who might be able to help her. Chapter 13, The desperate countermeasures. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen tried everything she could think of to avoid the demolition. She hired her own surveyor, who mysteriously came to different conclusions than mine. According to her surveyor, the property lines were ambiguous and required professional interpretation. She filed multiple complaints with the county about Inspector Rodriguez, claiming he was biased and hadn't followed proper procedures. She demanded a second inspection and threatened to sue the county for harassment. Karen also tried to mobilize the HOA board and other neighbors to pressure me into dropping the matter. Gerald Morrison, the HOA vice president, called me to suggest a compromise that would allow Karen to keep part of her patio in exchange for some unspecified future consideration. "This is tearing the neighborhood apart," he said. "Surely there's some way to work this out without all this legal drama." I politely explained that the law was clear and the evidence was overwhelming. There was no compromise possible when someone builds on your property without permission. Karen's most desperate move was attempting to claim adverse possession, the legal principle that allows someone to claim ownership of property they've used openly for an extended period. She hired a lawyer who specialized in property law to explore this option. But adverse possession requires continuous use for a specific period, usually 10 to 20 years depending on the state, and doesn't apply to construction that's only a few months old. Her lawyer ultimately advised her that she had no legal basis for the claim. Chapter 14, Demolition Day. When Karen failed to comply with the demolition order, the county scheduled the forced removal for a crisp Thursday morning. They contracted with a professional demolition crew that arrived with jackhammers, sledgehammers, and a small excavator. The crew efficiently set up safety barriers and began their work at precisely 8 a.m. The sound of the first jackhammer biting into the expensive stonework was like a starting gun for the drama that followed. Karen emerged from her house as if summoned by a siren, dressed in a pink velour tracksuit with matching sneakers. Her face was a mask of horror and rage as she watched months of work and thousands of dollars being reduced to rubble. "Stop! Stop!" she screamed at the workers. "This is illegal. I have injunctions." She waved papers that she claimed were court orders, but the crew supervisor reviewed them calmly and informed her they were not valid legal documents, just letters from her nephew who was a personal injury lawyer, not a property attorney. As the demolition continued, more neighbors gathered to watch the spectacle. Some filmed on their phones, and I knew the footage would be circulating on social media within hours. The HOA president having her illegal construction demolished was exactly the kind of neighborhood drama that would spread quickly. Karen tried calling the police, claiming the workers were destroying her property. When the officers arrived, they reviewed the county orders and informed her that the demolition was legal and authorized. "But I spent $30,000 on this patio," she wailed. "You can't just destroy it." "Ma'am, you should have thought about that before you built it on someone else's property," one of the officers replied. Chapter 15, The Destruction. The demolition was methodical and complete. The beautiful flagstone patio that had cost $30,000 was reduced to a pile of broken stone and rubble. The built-in fire pit was jackhammered into chunks of concrete and metal. The expensive outdoor lighting was carefully removed and placed on Karen's actual property to avoid any claims of property damage. Throughout the 3-hour demolition, Karen's voice grew hoarse from screaming about lawsuits, damages, and constitutional rights. She claimed the destruction was a conspiracy between me and the county inspector. She accused the workers of taking bribes. She even suggested that her position as HOA president gave her special property rights that superseded normal laws. The crew continued their work professionally, completely ignoring her theatrics. They had clearly dealt with similar situations before and knew to stay focused on their job while avoiding any engagement with the property owner. When they finished, they had cleared every inch of encroachment from my property, leaving bare dirt where Karen's illegal patio had stood. The contrast was stark: on one side, my pristine lawn, and on the other, churned earth and construction debris. The crew supervisor handed Karen a bill for $8,500 for the demolition work, due within 30 days. She stared at the invoice in disbelief, as if she couldn't process that she was being charged for the destruction of her own construction. Chapter 16, Legal Retaliation. Karen's final act of desperation was filing a lawsuit against everyone she could think of: me, the county, the demolition company, and even the surveyor. She sought damages of $100,000 for emotional distress, property damage, and defamation. The lawsuit was filed in the county courthouse with great fanfare. Karen held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by her nephew lawyer and a few supporters. She claimed she was fighting for the rights of all property owners against government overreach and neighborhood bullies. "This is about more than just my patio," she declared to the handful of reporters who showed up. "This is about the fundamental right to use and enjoy your own property without harassment from troublemakers and corrupt officials." The case was assigned to Judge Patricia Gwynn, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense. She reviewed the documentation quickly and scheduled a hearing for the following week. I felt confident in our legal position, but I was still nervous about appearing in court. Sarah Mitchell assured me that Karen's case was frivolous and would likely be dismissed quickly. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said. "Karen built on your property without permission, ignored multiple attempts to resolve the issue, and refused to comply with legal orders. She has no basis for any of her claims." Chapter 17, The Courtroom. The hearing was held in a modern courtroom with wood paneling and fluorescent lighting. Karen arrived dressed in a conservative business suit, her hair styled in a severe bun. She was accompanied by her nephew lawyer and a few supporters who filled the first row of the gallery. Judge Gwynn entered promptly at 9 a.m. and called the case. She had clearly reviewed all the documentation in advance and got straight to the point. "Ms. Peterson, you're seeking damages for the demolition of structures that you built on your neighbor's property without permission. Is that correct?" Karen's nephew stood up to respond, but Judge Gwynn cut him off. "I'd like to hear from your client directly." Karen stood and launched into a passionate speech about property rights, neighborhood harassment, and government overreach. She claimed that property lines were ambiguous, that she had relied on her 15 years of experience in the neighborhood, and that the county had acted hastily and unfairly. Judge Gwynn listened patiently for about 5 minutes before interrupting. "Ms. Peterson, do you have any evidence that contradicts the official property survey?" "Well, I hired my own surveyor who said the lines were unclear." "Do you have any evidence that you obtained proper permits for your construction?" "I was told by the contractors that permits weren't necessary for this type of work." "Do you have any evidence that the county inspector acted improperly in his investigation?" Karen's responses became increasingly desperate and incoherent. She had no evidence to support any of her claims, just her own assertions and beliefs. Judge Gwynn reviewed the survey documents, the county inspection reports, and the photographic evidence. After less than 15 minutes, she reached her decision. Chapter 18, Justice served. This case is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Gwynn announced. Ms. Peterson, you built structures on property that does not belong to you without obtaining proper permits or permission. When you were notified of the encroachment, you refused to acknowledge the problem and failed to comply with legal orders for removal. The judge continued, your claims of emotional distress and property damage are without merit. You cannot claim damages for the removal of structures that were illegally built on someone else's property. But Judge Gwynn wasn't finished. Furthermore, this lawsuit appears to be frivolous and filed in bad faith. I'm ordering you to pay all legal fees for the defendants. The legal fees totaled $12,000, adding to Karen's mounting bills. Her nephew lawyer tried to argue for a reduced penalty, but Judge Gwynn cut him off. Counselor, property law is clearly not your area of expertise. I suggest you advise your client to seek proper legal counsel if she wishes to pursue any appeals. When the judge read the dismissal, Karen sat in stunned silence, her mouth open in disbelief. She had clearly expected some kind of vindication or at least a sympathetic hearing. Instead, she had been thoroughly defeated and ordered to pay thousands of dollars in additional costs. As the bailiff announced the next case, Karen had to be practically dragged from the courtroom by her nephew. Her designer heels clicked on the marble floor as she continued to sputter about appeals and Supreme Court challenges. Chapter 19, the aftermath. The legal victory was complete, but the neighborhood drama continued for several more weeks. Karen's lawsuit and its dismissal became the talk of Burwood Heights, with residents taking sides and discussing the case endlessly on the community message board. Some residents continued to support Karen, viewing her as a victim of an overzealous neighbor and county bureaucracy. They organized a fundraiser to help with her legal costs and started a petition calling for Inspector Rodriguez to be disciplined. But the majority of residents seemed to support the outcome. Many privately shared stories of Karen's bullying behavior and previous attempts to push boundaries. Bob Martinez organized a neighborhood barbecue specifically to show support for my position. It's about time someone stood up to her, he told the gathered neighbors. She's been getting away with this kind of behavior for years. Margaret Chin nodded in agreement. I've been saying for years that she thinks the rules don't apply to her. Maybe now she'll learn that actions have consequences. The HOA board also underwent some changes. Gerald Morrison stepped down as vice president, and 2 new members were elected who promised to be more responsive to residents' concerns and less influenced by Karen's authority. Chapter 20, Resolution and Reflection. 6 months after the demolition, my backyard was finally peaceful again. The bare dirt where Karen's patio had stood was now covered with new grass, and the property line was clearly marked with decorative stones. I had even planted a small garden along the boundary to clearly delineate the separation between our properties. Karen's behavior toward me remained cold but civil. She no longer waved when we encountered each other getting mail, and she avoided any direct interaction. But she also stopped the harassment and intimidation tactics that had characterized our early relationship. The financial cost of her mistake was significant. Between the demolition costs, legal fees, and county fines, Karen had spent nearly $50,000 on her property encroachment adventure. The $30,000 patio had become a very expensive lesson in property law. I learned several important lessons from the experience. First, documentation is crucial in any property dispute. The photographs, measurements, and written communications proved essential in building a strong legal case. Second, standing up to bullies is sometimes necessary, even when it's uncomfortable and expensive. Most importantly, I learned that suburban paradise comes with its own set of challenges and personalities. Karen Peterson's $30,000 mistake had taught both of us valuable lessons about property rights, community relationships, and the importance of following the law. The neighborhood eventually returned to its peaceful routine, but the story of Karen's property line war became a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. And whenever new residents moved to Burwood Heights, they would inevitably hear about the HOA president who learned the hard way that property lines are not suggestions.